The colony ship Endurance drifted through the endless dark of space, like a wounded animal searching for shelter that did not exist. And Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge watching the emergency lights flicker with a red glow that made everything look like it was bleeding. She had not slept in 3 days, and the weight of 12,000 lives pressed down on her shoulders, like a mountain made of guilt and fear and responsibility that no single human should ever have to carry alone. Captain, life support will fail in 72 hours. Chief Engineer Marcus Chen said from his station, his voice calm, but his eyes betraying the terror that lived inside every crew member who understood their situation. Vasquez turned to face him and saw a man who had given everything to keep this ship alive. A man whose hands were burned from emergency repairs, and whose face showed the exhaustion of someone fighting a battle he knew he could not win. And the engines? She asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it spoken aloud. Dead, Chung replied, shaking his head slowly. The quantum drive suffered a cascade failure when we hit that debris field, and we do not have the parts or the materials to fix it. Vasquez walked to the main viewport and stared out at the stars that surrounded them, beautiful and cold and indifferent to the fate of the tiny vessel, filled with sleeping humans who had left Earth seeking a new home. They had traveled for 18 months in cryosleep, dreaming of green fields and blue skies on a world called New Eden, never imagining that they would wake up to die in the black emptiness between stars. There has to be something, she whispered. More to herself than to anyone else, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Wong approached with a tablet in her hands, and her expression held something that Vasquez had not seen in days. Something that looked almost like hope. Captain, our long-range sensors detected something unusual on the dead moon in this system, Wong said, pulling up the scan results. There is a structure there, something artificial. And it is definitely not human. Vasquez felt her heart beat faster as she studied the readings, seeing the unmistakable signature of technology far more advanced than anything humanity had ever created. How old is it? She asked. The computer estimates at least 40,000 years, Wong answered. Maybe older. Chun moved closer to look at the data, and his engineer's mind was already racing through possibilities that seemed impossible just moments ago. If there is power still running through that structure after 40,000 years, the technology must be incredible, he said. Maybe we could find something there, something that could help us. Vasquez knew the risks of exploring alien ruins, especially with limited crew and failing life support. But she also knew that doing nothing meant certain death for everyone aboard her ship. Prepare a shuttle, she ordered. Chun, Wong, you are with me. 3 hours later, the small shuttle touched down on the gray surface of the moon, and the 3 humans stepped out into a landscape that had not seen visitors in millennia. The structure rose before them like a temple built by gods, its smooth walls covered in symbols that seemed to shift and dance in the light of their flashlights. This is incredible, Wong breathed, running her gloved hand along the surface. The metal is completely untouched by time. They found the entrance after 20 minutes of searching. A doorway that opened silently when Chun accidentally touched a panel that glowed with soft blue light inside. The air was stale but breathable, and the walls hummed with power that had waited patiently for someone to return. At the center of the structure stood a console unlike anything they had ever seen, covered in crystals that pulsed with inner light and surrounded by screens that displayed star maps of incredible detail. It is some kind of communication relay, Chun said, studying the technology with wonder in his eyes. I think it can send signals across incredible distances, maybe even across the entire galaxy. Vasquez stepped forward and looked at the console, knowing that activating alien technology without understanding it was dangerous, but also knowing that her people would die without help. Can we use it to send a distress signal? She asked. Chun worked for several minutes, his fingers moving carefully across the interface, learning its patterns and rhythms like a musician learning a new instrument. "I think so," he finally said. "But Captain, this thing broadcasts on frequencies I have never seen before, and I have no idea who might be listening." Vasquez thought about the sleeping colonists, the families and children and dreamers who had trusted her to deliver them to a new world. And she made her decision. "Do it," she commanded. Chun activated the relay, and a pulse of energy shot outward from the moon, piercing through the fabric of space itself and traveling faster than light across distances that human minds could barely comprehend on the bridge of the Endurance. The crew waited and hoped and prayed to whatever gods they believed in, but the signal did not reach friendly ears, thousands of light years away, in a nebula that had hidden them from their enemies for 40,000 years. The Kethvari detected the transmission. Supreme Commander Vorath stood in his war room aboard the flagship Eternal Vengeance, his forearms crossed over his armored chest, and his yellow eyes burning with an emotion that mixed fear and rage in equal measure. "Impossible," he growled, studying the signal's origin point on the holographic display. "That frequency has been silent since the precursors vanished." His second in command, Fleet Admiral Corax, moved beside him with scales that had turned pale with terror. "Could it be them?" "Supreme Commander?" Corax asked. "Could the precursors have returned?" Vorath remembered the stories passed down through generations, tales of the ancient beings who had once ruled the galaxy with power beyond imagination. Beings who had nearly destroyed the Kethvari before mysteriously disappearing. "If they have returned, we cannot wait for them to grow strong again," Vorath declared. "We strike now, before they can rebuild what they once were." He turned to face his officers, his voice echoing through the massive chamber. "Wake the Armada," he commanded. "All 10,000 ships, every warrior we have, every weapon at our disposal." Throughout the hidden nebula, ships that had slept for centuries began to stir, engines igniting with fire that turned the darkness into day. "This time," Vorath whispered as he watched his fleet prepare for war, "we strike first." The Armada set course for the Forbidden Sector, for the tiny moon where a desperate human captain had unknowingly called down doom upon her entire species. And aboard the Endurance, Captain Vasquez smiled with relief as she reported to her crew that help was surely on the way, never knowing that she had just awakened the greatest military force the galaxy had ever seen. 6 days after sending the distress signal, the sensors aboard the Endurance detected something that made every crew member freeze in place, their eyes fixed on screens that showed what their minds could not accept. 10,000 ships emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation, each one massive beyond anything humanity had ever built, their dark hulls covered in weapons that glowed with terrible energy. Captain Vasquez stood on the bridge and felt the blood drain from her face as she realized the true scale of what had answered her call. "My God." Lieutenant Wong whispered beside her. "Those ships could destroy planets." The communications console lit up with an incoming transmission, and a voice spoke in a language that the universal translator struggled to interpret. Harsh and commanding, and filled with the authority of absolute power. "Unknown vessel, you have activated a precursor beacon and summoned the dominion of Kethvari," the voice announced. "Prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will result in immediate destruction." Vasquez looked at her crew and saw the fear in their eyes, but she also saw something else, a desperate hope that maybe these aliens had come to help after all. "This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the human colony ship Endurance," she transmitted back, keeping her voice steady despite the terror that gripped her heart. "We activated the beacon because we are in distress and need assistance." The response came after a long pause, carrying confusion that the translator rendered as something close to disbelief. "Humans? We do not know this species," the voice replied. Remain in place. Our ambassador will board your vessel. An hour later, Vasquez stood in the main cargo bay with a small security team, watching as a shuttle far more advanced than anything she had ever seen landed gracefully on the deck. The door opened, and she got her first look at the Kethvari ambassador. Kyreth stood 8 feet tall, his body covered in dark green scales that gleamed under the cargo bay lights, and his forearms ended in hands with claws that could tear through steel. Behind him came a dozen soldiers in armor that seemed to absorb the light around them. Their weapons pointed at the humans with casual precision. Kyreth's yellow eyes scanned the cargo bay, then moved to Vasquez, and she saw something in his gaze that she did not expect. Something that looked almost like disappointment. "You are the ones who activated the beacon?" he asked, his voice deep and resonant. "Yes. Our ship is damaged, and we needed help," Vasquez answered. Refusing to show the fear that screamed inside her chest, Kyreth moved closer, towering over her small frame, and his eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel like a specimen under a microscope. "You are so small," he observed. "So fragile, no natural armor, no claws, no venom. Your teeth are flat and useless for combat." He reached out with one clawed hand and touched her shoulder, testing the softness of her flesh, the weakness of her bones. "How do your people survive?" he asked, genuine curiosity mixing with contempt in his voice. "We find ways," Vasquez replied simply. The ambassador made a sound that might have been laughter, then turned to examine the rest of the humans, his soldiers following his gaze. "These creatures pose no threat," he reported through his communicator. "They have no psychic abilities, no advanced weapons, and their lifespans appear to be less than a century." The response came from Supreme Commander Vorath himself, his voice cutting through the cargo bay speakers. "They activated a precursor beacon. Ambassador, that alone makes them dangerous or valuable. Find out what they know." What followed were hours of interrogation as the Kethvari scanned the Endurance from top to bottom, examining every piece of technology and questioning every crew member who was awake. Kyreth learned that humanity had only been traveling among the stars for 300 years, a blink of an eye compared to the millennia that the Kethvari had sailed the void. He learned that humans knew nothing about the precursors, had never heard the name before today, and had activated the beacon purely by accident. He learned that Earth was the human homeworld, a small blue planet in a distant system, defended by a fleet that numbered only 200 ships. And when he reported all of this to Supreme Commander Vorath, the commander's response chilled Vasquez to her core. "These creatures occupy precursor territory," Vorath declared. "They may know the locations of precursor weapons without realizing what they have found. We will take their ship and travel to their homeworld to investigate." "Wait!" Vasquez shouted, stepping forward despite the weapons that immediately pointed at her chest. "We answered your call. We trusted you, and you repay us by invading our home?" Kyreth looked at her with something that might have been respect, surprised that such a small and fragile creature would stand against the might of the Dominion. "It is not personal. Human," he said. "The precursors were our greatest enemy, and if there is any chance that their weapons still exist, we must find them before anyone else does." The Kethvari soldiers moved through the ship, taking control of essential systems and placing the crew on guard. Vasquez and her senior officers were brought to the flagship Eternal Vengeance, where they were placed in cells that hummed with energy fields that made escape impossible as the Armada prepared to jump toward Earth. Vasquez sat in her cell and felt the weight of failure crushing her spirit. She had called for help and brought destruction instead, and now her homeworld would pay the price for her desperation. But in the cell next to hers, young communications officer David Park worked on something hidden in his uniform, his fingers moving with desperate speed. "Captain," he whispered through the energy field that separated them, "before they jammed our communications, I managed to send a burst transmission toward Earth. Vasquez felt hope ignite in her chest, like a flame that refused to die. What did you send? She asked. Everything, Park replied. The number of ships, their weapon signatures, their estimated arrival time. Everything our sensors recorded before they took control. How long until they arrive at Earth? 6 days, Captain. Our people have 6 days to prepare. Vasquez leaned back against the cold wall of her cell and closed her eyes, thinking about her home, about the billions of people who did not yet know that an armada of 10,000 warships was coming to conquer or destroy them. 6 days was not enough. Time to build a fleet that could match the HFY. 6 days was not enough time to develop weapons that could penetrate their shields. 6 days was not enough time for anything. That made sense, but as Vasquez thought about human history, about all the times her species had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender, she felt something stir inside her that went beyond hope. It was faith, not in gods or luck, but in the stubborn, defiant nature of humanity itself. 6 days, she whispered to herself. You have no idea what we can do in 6 days. And across the void, Earth received a warning and began to wake up to the greatest challenge it had ever faced. The message from the Endurance arrived at Earth at 3 in the morning, and within 1 hour, every leader on the planet was awake and staring at data that spelled the end of everything they knew. Admiral James Okonkwo stood in the United Earth Defense Council war room, surrounded by generals and politicians whose faces had turned pale with the knowledge of what was coming. 10,000 warships, Defense Minister Chun Wei said, a voice trembling despite her efforts to control it. We have 200, and most of those are patrol vessels designed to chase pirates, not fight a war. The holographic display showed the comparison between human ships and HFY vessels, and the difference was so great that some officers actually laughed at the absurdity of it. One HFY battleship was larger than 20 human cruisers combined, and the Armada contained thousands of such monsters. We should negotiate, President Morrison said, rubbing his temples with exhausted hands. Surely these aliens can be reasoned with. We can offer them whatever they want. Admiral Okonkwo shook his head slowly, his dark eyes fixed on the display with an intensity that made the other leaders uncomfortable. According to the transmission from Captain Vasquez, they believe we are sitting on ancient weapons left behind by their enemies, he said. They will tear our planet apart looking for things that do not exist. And what do you suggest, Admiral? Morrison asked. We cannot fight them. We cannot run. We cannot hide 10 billion people. Okonkwo was silent for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that filled the entire room. We fight anyway, he declared. The room erupted in protests and arguments, voices shouting over each other in a chaos of fear and desperation. You are talking about suicide, General Torres shouted. Every ship we send will be destroyed in seconds. Probably, Okonkwo agreed calmly. But what is the alternative? Do we surrender and hope for mercy from creatures who see us as insects? Do we evacuate and leave our children to grow up as slaves? He turned to face the assembly, and in his eyes burned a fire that had lived in human hearts since the first of their kind had stood up against a predator in the ancient forests of Africa. Humanity has faced extinction before, he said. We survived ice ages that covered half our world. We survived plagues that killed hundreds of millions. We survived wars that made us question our very right to exist. He pointed at the display showing the HFY Armada. This is just another extinction event, he continued. And like everyone before it, we will face it standing on our feet, not kneeling on our knees. The room fell silent, and something changed in the air. Something that transformed fear into determination. What do you need? President Morrison finally asked. Everything, Okonkwo replied. Every ship that can fly, every weapon that can fire, every human being who is willing to fight. What happened in the next 6 days would be remembered for as long as humanity existed. Shipyards that normally took months to build a single vessel suddenly produced dozens of armed craft as workers abandoned sleep and pushed their bodies beyond all reasonable limits. Mining ships were stripped of their drilling equipment and fitted with nuclear warheads designed for asteroid deflection. Passenger liners had their luxurious interiors gutted to make room for weapon systems and armor plating. Cargo haulers became mobile bomb platforms, their massive holds filled with explosives that could turn each vessel into a weapon of last resort across the planet. Factories switched from making consumer goods to producing weapons and ammunition, their machines running around the clock as the entire industrial capacity of Earth focused on a single purpose. Scientists and engineers worked together to analyze the data from the Endurance, studying HFY shield frequencies and weapon signatures, searching for any weakness that might give humanity a chance and the people of Earth. The ordinary men and women who had never held a weapon in their lives stepped forward to volunteer in numbers that overwhelmed the military's ability to process them. Farmers and teachers and artists and workers, all of them coming together with a single message: we will fight by the 5th day. Admiral Okonkwo had assembled a fleet of 2,000 vessels, most of them civilian ships hastily converted for combat, crewed by people who had never seen battle, but who refused to hide while others died for them. It was still not enough. Not nearly enough, but it was something. And then the morning of the 6th day arrived, and the HFY Armada entered the Sol system aboard the flagship Eternal Vengeance. Supreme Commander Vorath watched his sensors with satisfaction, expecting to see the human fleet fleeing toward the outer planets or attempting to hide behind their primitive orbital stations. Instead, he saw something that made his scales tighten with an emotion he had not felt in centuries. "Report," he demanded, his voice sharp with confusion. "Commander, the humans are not retreating," Fleet Admiral Korak said, staring at his display with disbelief. "They are moving toward us, all of them. And they are broadcasting a message. Put it through." Vorath commanded. The speakers crackled, and then a human voice filled the bridge, calm and steady, and carrying no trace of the fear that Vorath expected to hear. "Attention, HFY Dominion. This is Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Earth Defense Force. You are entering human space without permission and with hostile intent." Vorath leaned forward, fascinated despite himself by the audacity of these tiny creatures. "You are outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched in every way that matters," the message continued. "Common sense says you should surrender. Common sense says you should flee. But you have made a mistake." The human fleet continued to advance, 2,000 ships against 10,000. Garbage haulers and mining vessels against the greatest armada ever assembled. "You came here thinking we were weak," Admiral Okonkwo's voice declared. "You came here thinking we would be easy prey. But you forgot something important." Ambassador Kyrith, who had been brought to the bridge to advise on human behavior, felt a chill run down his spine as he listened. "I studied their history," he whispered to Vorath. "They have a phrase for this. They call it having their backs against the wall. What does it mean?" Vorath asked. Kyrith's yellow eyes were wide with something that looked disturbingly like fear. "It means they are most dangerous when they have no way out," he replied. "It means they fight hardest when survival is impossible." Admiral Okonkwo's message finished with words that would echo through history. "You should not have come here," he said. "But since you have, allow us to show you what humanity is truly capable of when we have nothing left to lose." The human fleet opened fire, and the Battle of Sol began. The first wave of human ships died in seconds, their nuclear missiles bouncing harmlessly off HFY shields as energy weapons tore through their makeshift Armor like claws through paper, Supreme Commander Vorath watched the destruction with grim satisfaction. Seeing exactly what he had expected from such primitive creatures and their pathetic technology, destroy them all, he ordered. Leave none alive to tell tales of resistance. But something strange began to happen in the chaos of battle. Something that made Vorath's confidence crack like ice under pressure. The second wave of human ships did not die as easily as the first. Somehow, impossibly, their weapons had changed. Their missiles now detonating in patterns that matched Kethvari's shield frequencies, slipping through defenses that had been impenetrable just moments before. How is this possible? Korax shouted, watching as a Kethvari cruiser exploded under human fire. They cannot have adapted so quickly, but they had. And they continued to adapt as the battle raged on. Human commanders shared data across their fleet in real time, learning from every failed attack and adjusting their tactics with a speed that the Kethvari had never witnessed in any species. What took the Dominion generations to implement, humans did in minutes. They are learning, Ambassador Kareth said, his voice carrying a terror that spread through the bridge like poison. Every time we destroy one of their ships, the others learn from how it died. Vorath ordered new attack patterns, new shield configurations, new weapon deployments. But the humans matched every change with changes of their own. And then the humans began to do something that no species had ever done to the Kethvari before they started wing individual engagements. A mining vessel, named the Lucky Strike, rammed itself directly into a Kethvari destroyer. Its cargo hold packed with explosive charges that turned both ships into an expanding cloud of fire and debris. A passenger liner called the Hope of Tomorrow flew straight into the engine section of a battlecruiser, its captain broadcasting a final message to his family as he triggered the overload that took 500 enemy soldiers with him, human pilots ejected from crippled ships only to guide their dying vessels into collision courses with Kethvari targets, giving their lives to buy seconds of advantage for their comrades. They are insane, Korax screamed, watching as another human ship sacrificed itself to destroy a Kethvari frigate. What kind of creatures throw their lives away so willingly? But Vorath was beginning to understand, and the understanding filled him with a fear he had not felt since childhood. These creatures did not fight like any species he had ever encountered. They did not calculate odds or weigh survival against victory. They simply refused to stop, refused to surrender, refused to accept that death was a reason to give up across the battlefield. The impossible was becoming real. Human ships used debris fields as cover, hiding among the wreckage of their fallen comrades to launch surprise attacks. They turned captured Kethvari escape pods into bombs, flying them back toward their former owners with deadly accuracy. They communicated through means the Kethvari could not block, coordinating attacks through visual signals and radio frequencies and methods so primitive that Dominion jamming technology could not stop them. For every human ship that died, they took 5 Kethvari vessels with them. Supreme Commander, we have a problem, Korax reported, his voice shaking. There has been a security breach on the lower decks. The human prisoners have escaped. Vorath roared with fury, but before he could issue orders, the lights on the bridge flickered and alarms began to scream. Captain Elena Vasquez had not spent her time in captivity feeling sorry for herself. She had watched her captors learn their patterns, memorize the layout of the ship through the reflections in her guards' armor, and when the battle began and chaos spread through the flagship, she had made her move using a food tray sharpened against her cell floor. She had disabled the guard who came to check on the prisoners, taken his weapon, and freed her crew. Now she stood in the engine room of the Eternal Vengeance, surrounded by human colonists who had been awakened from cryosleep and armed with tools taken from maintenance lockers. We take the ship, she ordered, her voice steady despite the blood running from a cut on her forehead. "Or we die trying." The Kethvari security forces that rushed to stop them outnumbered the humans 3-1 and outweighed them by twice as much. It did not matter. Humans fought with a ferocity that the Kethvari had never seen, using every object as a weapon, biting and clawing and refusing to fall, even when wounded Vorath himself came to the engine room to deal with the threat, his ceremonial blade drawn and his personal guards surrounding him. He found Vasquez waiting for him, standing over the bodies of a dozen fallen warriors, a Kethvari energy rifle in her hands and fire in her eyes. "Surrender." "Human," Vorath commanded. "You cannot win against me. I have killed thousands of warriors stronger than you," Vasquez laughed, a sound that carried no humor but something far more dangerous. "You still do not understand us," she said. "We do not fight because we think we can win. We fight because fighting is who we are," she attacked. And Vorath was shocked to find that despite his superior size and strength and training, this tiny creature pushed him to his limits. He wounded her again and again, his blade cutting through her flesh, breaking her bones. But she refused to stop. Every time he thought she would fall, she rose again, driven by something that went beyond survival instinct. And as he looked into her eyes, as he saw the absolute refusal to surrender that burned there like a star, Vorath finally understood what the humans truly were. The realization hit him like a physical blow, staggering him backward as his mind processed information that changed everything he thought he knew. The precursors. He gasped, staring at Vasquez with new eyes. "You are not their descendants. You are not their servants. You are the precursors." Vasquez lowered her weapon slightly, confusion mixing with the pain on her face. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. Vorath's hands were shaking as he spoke the truth that had been hidden for 40,000 years. "The precursors did not disappear," he said. "They did not die or flee or transcend to another dimension. They chose to become something new, to start over, to be reborn." He looked at Vasquez, at her small body and her short lifespan and her complete lack of natural weapons, and he saw the wisdom of their choice. They gave up their power, their immortality, their empire, he continued. They became mortal creatures who had to struggle and fight and earn everything they achieved. His voice dropped to a whisper filled with awe and terror. "You are what the precursors became when they wanted to remember what it meant to be alive." The battle stopped as if the universe itself had pressed a pause button, and silence fell across the void where moments before fire and death had reigned supreme. Supreme Commander Vorath stood before Captain Elena Vasquez, his blade lowered, his forearms hanging limp at his sides as the weight of revelation crushed his warrior's pride into dust. "You are certain?" Vasquez asked, her wounds forgotten as she processed words that rewrote everything she understood about her species. "The genetic markers do not lie," Vorath replied, his voice hollow and broken. "When we first captured your people, our scientists compared your biology to the precursor remains we have preserved for millennia. The match was too perfect to be coincidence." He gestured weakly toward the viewport, where the frozen battlefield sparkled with the debris of destroyed ships from both sides. "We thought you had returned to destroy us," he continued. "We thought you were the ancient enemy coming to finish what you started 40,000 years ago. But we had no idea any of this existed," Vasquez said. "We did not even know other species were out there until you arrived." Vorath nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his yellow eyes. "That is what makes it so brilliant," he explained. "The precursors did not simply retire or hide. They erased their own memories, wiped away every trace of what they once were, and started over as primitive creatures on a small blue world." Ambassador Kyreth entered the engine room, stepping carefully over the bodies of fallen warriors. his scales pale and his expression carrying something that looked almost like reverence. "The analysis is complete. Supreme Commander," he reported. "Human neural patterns contain dormant structures that match precursor brain architecture. Their DNA carries encrypted sequences that our best scientists cannot begin to decode. Why would they do this?" Vasquez asked, struggling to accept that her entire species was the reincarnation of ancient godlike beings. Varth was silent for a long moment before answering. "I think I understand," he finally said. "The precursors ruled the galaxy for millions of years. They had technology that could reshape stars. They had conquered death itself and lived forever." He looked at Vasquez with eyes that held no more hostility, only a profound sadness mixed with respect. But somewhere along the way, they lost something important, he continued. They forgot what it meant to struggle, to grow, to earn their place in the universe. So they made a choice that my people could never understand. "They chose to be mortal," Vasquez whispered, the truth settling into her bones. "They chose to be human," Varth confirmed outside. The Kethvari Armada began to stand down as Vorath's orders spread through the fleet, and the surviving human ships slowly lowered their weapons in confused relief. The Battle of Sol was over, and against all odds, humanity had survived in the days that followed. The full truth emerged piece by piece as Kethvari archaeologists and historians shared their ancient records with their former enemies. The precursors had indeed been the masters of the galaxy, beings of such power that the very laws of physics bent to their will, but their immortality had become a curse, and their power had made existence meaningless. They had debated for centuries about how to solve their existential crisis, and in the end, they had chosen the most radical solution possible. They had rebuilt themselves as a new species, fragile and mortal and completely unaware of their heritage. And they had placed themselves on a young planet in a quiet corner of the galaxy. They had given themselves the gift of struggle, the opportunity to grow and learn and fail and triumph. All the experiences that their godhood had denied them, and they had waited, perhaps unconsciously, for the day when their children would prove themselves worthy of the truth. "Your species passed the test," Vorath told Vasquez as they stood together on the observation deck of his flagship, now peacefully orbiting Earth. "When you faced annihilation, you did not surrender, you did not beg. You fought with everything you had. That is just who we are," Vasquez replied, watching the sun rise over her home world. "That is who the precursors wanted to become," Varth corrected. "That is the best version of what any species can be." The Kethvari offered humanity access to the precursor vaults, ancient repositories of technology that could transform them back into the godlike beings they had once been. It would have been easy to accept, to claim the power that was their birthright, to take their place as the rulers of the galaxy once more. But when Admiral Okonkwo addressed the United Earth Council with the offer, his response surprised no one who understood what humanity truly valued. The precursors gave up godhood because it made them forget what life means. He declared, "If we take back that power now, we betray everything our ancestors sacrificed to create." He looked out at the assembly, at the representatives of a species that had just fought against impossible odds and refused to break. "We did not survive because of ancient technology or inherited power," he continued. "We survived because we are human, because we adapt and fight and never give up. And that is worth more than all the precursor relics in the galaxy." The vote was unanimous. Humanity declined the offer, choosing to continue building their own future one step at a time, earning their place in the cosmos just as they had earned their survival. The Kethvari returned to their empire with a new understanding of the universe and their place in it. They spread the word to every species they encountered. The humans were not to be conquered, not because they were the precursors reborn, but because they represented something far more important. They were proof that any species could choose to be more than what they were, could embrace struggle and growth over comfort and stagnation. Years passed, and the relationship between humans and HFY grew from cautious alliance into genuine friendship. Joint colonies were established. Trade routes opened, and children from both species learned to play together on worlds that had never known peace before. Captain Elena Vasquez retired from active duty and took a position as the ambassador to the first human HFY settlement, a beautiful world they named New Hope. One evening, as she stood on her balcony watching human and HFY children chase each other through the gardens below, her aide approached with a question. "Ambassador, do you ever wonder what humanity could have become if we had taken the precursor power?" Vasquez smiled, watching a young human girl help a HFY child climb a tree that was too tall for either of them to manage alone. "The precursors had everything," she replied. "Immortality, unlimited power, knowledge beyond imagination. And they gave it all up to become us." She turned to face her aide, and her eyes held the same fire that had burned in them during the darkest hours of the battle for Earth. "That means being human was always the goal," she said. "The precursors did not make a mistake, they made a choice. And we honored that choice by being the best versions of ourselves, not by going back to what they left behind." The aide nodded slowly, understanding settling into his young features below. The children's laughter echoed across the garden as the sun set on a galaxy forever changed by the stubborn courage of a species that had once ruled the stars and had chosen to earn their way back to them, and somewhere in the depths of space, in archives that had waited for 40,000 years, ancient records updated themselves with a simple message that the precursors had programmed long ago. A message triggered by the choice their descendants had made. The message read, "They are ready, but what they were ready for was a story for another time."